This week, we are going to turn our attention away from finding scholarly articles and start looking specifically at finding books and book chapters. Now, when I tell people that I'm a librarian, almost always without fail, they will say something like, "Oh, it must be so great to spend your days amongst books." And you know what? I do love books, but I hardly ever get to read a book at work. And even if you were to come into my library here in Meridian, you wouldn't find that many books. We only have a few hundred. We obviously have a much larger physical book collection in Pocatello, and we have tons of eBooks. But most of my time is spent at the computer, either helping students learn how to conduct research or really looking for article-based information. So books sometimes feel like they get forgotten, but in reality, books can be super useful. And I hope that you have some of those takeaways this week. We didn't start with books in this class, in part or mostly because different disciplines prefer information sources for different reasons. And so in the health sciences, where most of you are studying, most of the evidence that we're going to use in our research is found in scholarly articles. It tends not to be found in books. So we use books in other ways in the health sciences. This would be different if we were in a different discipline, like, for example, history would look very different than research in the health sciences. We may all use books and articles, but we use them in different ways and we value them in different ways. So that's one reason why we didn't start with books. But I will often go to books when I need a starting place for a topic, or if I need a general overview of a topic or something about a research question, because books tend to give you more of a big picture. Scholarly articles are written on a really narrow level, whereas books have a broader focus, which means they tend to use more approachable language. They have more space to actually explain their language, and they also tend to cover a lot of ground rather than being really narrowly focused on one specific area of research. So again, this can be good for that 30,000-foot view of a topic. Another way that books can be useful is that academic books specifically tend to cite research. And so this can be a good way to wrap your head around what kind of research might be available on your topic or on your research question. And also you can look at their reference lists to find more information. I mentioned that books are written on a slightly broader level than journal articles, and I wanted to just demonstrate a little bit about what that means. I have a sample research question here. Do patients with mild to moderate Crohn's disease benefit from an anti-inflammatory diet? I'm just going to use that as a sample question here for a minute. If I were looking at something like a reference work or an encyclopedia, which you were briefly introduced to at the beginning of the class, I would expect to find an encyclopedia like maybe the Gale Encyclopedia of Diets. So this is a pretty broad text. Diets is pretty general. It could be a lot of different things. And within that text, I might find something on anti-inflammatory diets. So some general information about what that means, maybe tied to my research population. I'm not really sure just from the title, but it's just going to be some kind of general information on the diet itself. Now, for books, I might be able to find something like Crohn's disease, classification, diagnosis, and treatment options. That is pretty broad. Again, it's covering a lot of ground between classification, how do we actually diagnose the disease, and then how do we actually treat the disease. And within that book, I may find a chapter called Nutrition and Inflammatory Bowel Disease. So I would expect in that chapter to get some general information about how nutrition can play a role in the disease. When I get down to journal articles, I may find more specific information about testing specific diets within populations, developing different types of diets, and those kinds of things. So those are going to be written on a really narrow level with really specific populations, whereas the books, book chapters, and even reference works are going to give me more the lay of the land. These are going to be used in different ways in answering my research question. And I may use books and reference works, again, to point me to more specific journal articles, to find different language that I want to use, to understand the different ways that I might adapt my research question. There's lots of different ways we can use books, book chapters, and even reference works. as well as journal articles. So we're going to focus on the books and the book chapters for a little bit. You probably will not need to use an entire book for this class or for a lot of the work that you do in the health sciences. More often, you're going to be focused on book chapters because those are going to be the level of information that are most likely to be relevant to your question. So again, I have a sample book here that's about sports injuries. It covers a lot of ground, including prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation. And so if I go in and I look at the individual chapters, there's a chapter on, for example, risk factors for different injuries, injury preventions in some major sports. So I think, running and jumping is one example. I believe tennis was included. So if I was doing research in a specific sport population, that might be useful. And then in this book, they also break it down by different injuries in different parts of the anatomy. Those individual chapters are likely to be more relevant. There's more likely to be one or two chapters that are relevant to you than trying to read this entire book. This week, although we are looking for books, you are also welcome to look for book chapters because those are likely to be more relevant to more specific research questions. One of the other ways that we can think about dividing and using books is the physical book versus the ebook. And as I mentioned, if you were to come into my library in Meridian, I don't have that many physical books. ISU certainly has a lot of physical books, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can access those either at the library or at your home. And also, at this point, a lot of the books that I buy for the health science collection, we prefer to buy electronically. Electronic books have a lot of benefits. One is that you can access them from anywhere. We have programs in Meridian, we have programs in Pocatello and Anchorage, Idaho Falls, and then we also have online students that are all over the country. And so these electronic books really allow us to provide access to information regardless of where you are. Now, the downside can be it's really hard sometimes to browse for ebooks. When you're looking at physical books, what's kind of nice is that the books next to each other on the shelf tend to be pretty much about the same topic. I have a picture here of part of a shelf in my campus on Meridian. And what you would see if you could see the picture is that the books in the middle are all about understanding nursing research and evidence-based practice in nursing, which is what we in part use research for. So there's a section of about 10 books right here, right next to each other. If I were to find one book on this topic, I could then physically go to the shelf and kind of look to the left and right and find other books about my topic. The challenge with ebooks is that browsing or that serendipity is more difficult to replicate in the digital environment. And so we rely a lot more on keyword or subject searching in order to locate ebooks. And ebooks are also kind of cool because you're not limited just to the written word. A lot of our ebooks have things like videos or other kinds of multimedia included. And so those can be really helpful and additions that a physical book wouldn't have. I will say that our ebooks are not always as user-friendly as things as if you were to download them, say, to a Kindle or something like that. Some of the platforms that we use aren't as user-friendly. Sometimes you might run into restrictions where only one person can use an ebook at a time. So that is a little bit frustrating at times, but for the most part, I think our ebook collections have really strengthened in the last couple of years. For books is that you're also going to want to be paying attention to editions and edited works. Academic books are often updated. Again, that's one of the benefits of ebooks is if there's an update, we can pretty quickly get an updated version. And so that's when you're going to want to look for things like the 4th edition. This book that I have on the screen is a 4th edition. And so it has been published once and then updated another 3 times for 4 times total. The other thing to pay attention to is a lot of times academic books will have an editor or a couple of editors who are responsible for basically coordinating and creating the book. And then they will have authors that write individual chapters. And so there's a couple clues to look for. One is that the book cover will often say edited by and then have the list of editors on it. The other thing you can look for is in specific chapters, you will notice if it's an edited book that there are authors listed for each chapter. And so this could be sometimes the author of a chapter is the same person as the editor. And then in other cases, the authors are different than the editor. This can get a little bit confusing, but just pay attention to whether or not you're using an edited book, and then look to see if the individual chapters or entries are written by someone in particular. You will need to know this for your citations. The way you cite edited works and chapters is different than how you cite whole books. And you will want to be citing at the level that you're using it. So if you're only using one chapter, especially from an edited book, then you need to cite that specific chapter. That's really helpful for your reader because then they can just go to that specific chapter without having to, look through the entire book. And for items that are edited, especially where the author of the chapter is different than the editor, that also gives those people credit for their work. Now, we do have a lot of books. We have a lot of physical books, eBooks, like I said, but we don't own everything. This week, you're also going to be looking at a system called WorldCat. This is kind of like, it's supposed to be short for World Catalog. It's a catalog of books from a lot of different libraries across the world, like it sounds like. And so this is helpful when you are wanting to find out if a book exists, even if we don't own it. And then you can either get it from maybe a local public library, or you can request it through interlibrary loan through ISU. And we'll also spend a little bit of time looking at Google Books. So those are some of the search tools that you're going to use this week, in addition to the library search tools. This week, we're going to try some search tools specifically focused on finding books and book chapters. I will warn you, if you have a really specific research question, you may need to broaden your search, and that's okay. I understand that your annotations for books and book chapters may be for sources that are not a perfect match to your very narrow research question. That's totally to be expected. Just know that it is okay to broaden your search, and it is okay to think a little bit more about the big picture. So this is your opportunity to, again, zoom out, take the 30,000 foot view of your topic, and see what you can find.